Montana Territory, July 1883. The dust had not yet settled when Fletcher Grady heard the first scream. He was riding back from the stockyards outside Helena, cutting across scrubland that sloped toward the wagon trail. The sun was copper bright, the air dry enough to split lips, and his saddle creaked with every step of his gelding. He had not planned on stopping, not until he heard the cry, sharp and terrified, cutting clear through the wind. He kicked his horse into a gallop. Over the rise, he spotted the broken-down carriage, first its left wheel shattered and splintered on a rock. The horses were gone. A trunk lay busted open, its contents torn apart like someone had gone through it fast, desperate. Then he saw the woman. She was backed against a boulder, her pale blue traveling dress torn at the sleeve, hair spilling from a bun. Two men circled her, one with a pistol, the other with a rope. "Get away from her!" Fletcher shouted, drawing his rifle from his saddle scabbard without slowing down. The bandits spun, startled. One raised his gun. Fletcher fired first. The man dropped. The second turned to run, but Fletcher was already off his horse, tackling him to the ground. They wrestled hard, fists and knees, until Fletcher knocked him out cold with the butt of his rifle. When he stood, breathing hard, the woman was staring at him, her chest rising and falling quick. "Are you hurt?" he asked, stepping toward her. She shook her head, but her eyes were glassy. I do not think so. You came out of nowhere. I heard you scream." He looked her over, keeping his voice gentle. "You sure nothing's broken?" "No. Just scraped. Shaken." He offered his hand. She hesitated, then placed hers in his. Her fingers trembled in his palm. "Fletcher Grady," he said. "I live about an hour west of here." She swallowed, voice still tight. "Geneva Rosewell." He helped her to her feet. "What were you doing out here with that broken carriage?" "I was supposed to meet my fiancé in Helena. He sent for me through an agency. But the coach driver said we had to take a shortcut. Then those men came out of the trees. They shot the driver. Took the horses. Said they were going to..." She broke off, covering her mouth. Fletcher's jaw tightened. "They will not hurt anyone else." She looked around, dazed. "Everything I brought is gone. I have a place nearby. You can rest there. We will go to the sheriff tomorrow." Her eyes met his. "You do not even know me. You were almost killed today," he said. "That is enough for me." They rode double on his gelding. Geneva held tight around his waist, her cheek pressed to his back. He could feel her breathing steady as the miles passed under them. The sun was dipping low by the time his cabin came into view, a modest structure framed in pine, smoke curling from the chimney he had lit that morning. He helped her down, then opened the door. Inside, it was simple bed in the corner, stove still warm, table with 2 chairs. He lit a lamp. Geneva stepped in slowly, as if afraid to disturb anything. "I can take the floor," Fletcher said. "You can have the bed." "No," she said, voice firm for the first time. "You saved my life. I will not put you out of your own bed." He paused, then nodded once. "You hungry?" She nodded. He made beans and cornbread, and they ate in quiet. Outside, crickets started up. Inside, the silence between them was not awkward, just still, like the air before dawn. After supper, she sat beside the fire, her hands cupped around a tin mug. He noticed she kept glancing at the window, flinching at every wind gust. "You are safe," he said. "I know," but she kept watching the door. Fletcher stood. "I will keep watch, just in case." She looked up at him, eyes soft. "Why are you being so kind?" He hesitated. "Because you should have been met with flowers. Not bandits." Geneva blinked fast and a tear slipped down her cheek. She wiped it away quickly. "I was nervous about marrying a stranger. But I thought, maybe this was a chance to start over. To choose something good." Fletcher sat across from her. "You still can." She gave a quiet laugh. "The man I was supposed to marry sent no one to meet me. I doubt he is even real. Then he is a fool." She looked up at him. What kind of man rides straight into danger for someone he does not know? Fletcher took a breath. One who knows what it is to lose everything. Their eyes held each other's. The fire crackled low. "I lost my brother in the war," he said. "He was younger. I was supposed to keep him safe. I did not." I lost my parents to fever, she said. I was living with an aunt who only saw me as an extra mouth. She stood slowly, walked over to the window, and looked out into the dark. When they grabbed me, she whispered, I thought I would die. Fletcher stood slowly, walking to her side. But you did not. She turned to him. Because of you. He searched her face. Geneva. Her lips parted, breath soft. Fletcher. He took her face in his hands, gently. She leaned into him. Their kiss was quiet, warm like something longed for and finally found. When they pulled back, her hand stayed on his chest. I know this is fast, she whispered, but I do not want to wait. Not after what happened. I want to choose something good. Fletcher brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. You sure? Yes. He looked into her eyes. Then marry me. Tonight. She smiled wide and real. Yes. They rode out under moonlight to the small chapel in town. The preacher lived next door. He opened the door in his nightclothes, blinking hard until Fletcher said, We want to be married. Now. Geneva stood beside him, chin lifted, eyes shining. The preacher hesitated, then nodded. Give me a moment to get my Bible. They stood hand in hand under the chapel's low ceiling. There were no flowers, no guests, only oil lamps casting soft gold light. But Geneva's hands were steady, and Fletcher had never felt more sure of anything in his life. When the words were spoken and she became Geneva Grady, she leaned into him and whispered, You saved me. He held her close. You saved me back. And as they stepped out into the cool night air, husband and wife, he kissed her again, long and deep, and neither of them looked back. Fletcher rose early before the sun lifted its head over the pines. The cabin was still, the air cool with dew and the hush that comes after long, hard things. Geneva lay curled beneath the quilt, her breath slow and steady, one hand resting over the edge of the bed. He watched her for a moment, quiet at the sight. Then he stepped outside, letting the door fall closed behind him with a soft click. The horse needed tending. He checked the gelding's legs, brushed the dust from its coat, and refilled the trough by the shed. The morning light slid through the trees slow and gold, catching on the rusted hinges and the tin bucket that always leaked from the bottom seam. He'd meant to fix that months ago. When he stepped back inside, Geneva was sitting up, quilt pulled to her chest, her hair loose around her shoulders. She blinked at him, her voice husky from sleep. Did I dream it? No, he said. You're here. She looked down at her hands, then back at him. I don't even know how you take your coffee. I take it strong, he replied. I never drank it before. My aunt said it made women harsh. He gave a quiet laugh and moved to the stove. The beans had cooled, but the bread was still wrapped in a cloth beside the lamp. He set a pot to boil, poured grounds into the tin strainer, and stood quiet while it hissed. Geneva rose and wrapped herself in the shawl she found over the chair. She crossed to the table and sat. The morning had a hush to it that wasn't empty, more like something brand new, still settling into its shape. I'll need to get a letter out, she said after a pause. Let the agency know I won't be needing another match. Fletcher nodded. We'll ride into Helena. I'll stand beside you if they ask questions. They won't. Her mouth tightened for a second, then softened again. They never cared much past the fee. He poured the coffee and handed her a cup. She took it gingerly, sipped, and made a small face. Bitter, she said. He leaned against the counter. Told you. She looked around the cabin, her eyes moving over the shelves, the single coat hook by the door, the block of soap near the basin. You live quiet. I didn't always. He didn't offer more, and she didn't press. Instead, she stood and crossed to the window, looking out toward the tree line. What do you do, Fletcher? Ranch mostly. I've got some cattle, a few milk goats. Sell meat and eggs to the mercantile when I'm flush. I do odd work when there's no rain. She turned back to him, her fingers wrapped around the mug. You built this place? Every board. Her gaze lingered on him. I'd like to help. I can mend, cook, keep things clean. I've never worked stock, but I can learn. He stepped closer, his voice low. You don't owe me any of that. I know, she said. but I'd rather build something than just be kept. He nodded slow. All right? They rode into town by noon, the trail dry and pocked with old prints. Geneva sat astride with ease, her skirt tucked up over her boots, one of his wool shirts belted at the waist. She didn't speak much, but her eyes missed nothing, each fence post, the way the trail dipped near the creek bed, the hawks circling overhead. In Helena, they stopped first at the sheriff's office. Fletcher told him about the men, the broken carriage, the gunfire. Geneva added the rest, voice steady as she gave names and what she remembered of their faces. The sheriff scrawled notes and promised to send men to search the ridge. Afterward, they headed to the post hall. Geneva handed over a folded letter she'd written at the table that morning. She didn't say what it contained, and Fletcher didn't ask. They picked up supplies: flour, lamp oil, tobacco for Fletcher's pipe. Geneva chose a tin of dried lavender and a spool of thread, holding them like small treasures. When she turned toward him, there was a flush high on her cheek. "Do you mind?" she asked. "You can have anything you want," he said. Back at the cabin, she unpacked the parcel in the kitchen while he chopped kindling. When he came in, she was bent over the hearth, tying a bunch of lavender to the mantel beam with a bit of string. "It'll help with the smell of smoke," she said without turning. Fletcher watched her a moment, then crossed to the basin to wash his hands. "You settling in all right?" She straightened, wiped her palms on her skirt. "I think so. It's strange, but not in a bad way." He dried his hands and turned. "You're not just passing through anymore." "No," she said. "I'm not." That night, they sat on the porch after supper, her shoulders tucked beneath his arm, her head resting against him. The stars were fierce and bright overhead, the kind that looked close enough to touch. "I used to think if I just got far enough west, I'd stop feeling hunted," she said quietly. "And do you?" "I don't know yet, but I feel held." He kissed her temple. She laced her fingers through his. Neither of them spoke again that night. They just sat like that, breathing in the pine and the hush of summer dark, the space between them filled with something quiet and growing. The first thunder of early August rolled in low the next morning, distant and steady like a warning drum. Fletcher stood just beyond the porch, sleeves rolled to his elbows, eyes on the edge of the sky where the clouds had thickened into a dark shelf. The kind of weather that could break fences or drown a creek bed in under an hour. Geneva stepped outside behind him, her boots quiet on the wood. "Will it hit us?" "Hard to say. Could pass north. Could sit right on our heads." He glanced over. "We'll need to bring the goats in, cover the feed bins." She nodded once, already moving toward the shed without waiting for more. She moved with purpose now, not just in reaction to danger, but with steadiness, like the place had begun to shape itself around her and she around it. By mid-morning, the wind had picked up, snapping the laundry line and sending grit into the corners of the cabin. Fletcher came in with his hat pulled low and his shirt damp at the collar. Geneva was kneeling by the hearth, packing flour into a jar. Her sleeves were rolled high, and her hands moved quickly, dusted light at the knuckles. He leaned against the doorframe. "Storm or not, reckon we'll eat well. I found some dried apples in the bottom of the bin," she said without looking up. "Thought I might try a pie. I've never done it with lard instead of butter. You'll do it fine." She stood then, brushing her palms on her apron. "Do you ever miss being around more people?" He shook his head. "Not often. I thought I would. But lately I don't." "You don't have to answer if you'd rather not," he said, "but I've been wondering. What were you hoping that man in Helena would be like?" "The one you were supposed to marry." She turned to him, her eyes steady. "I wanted someone who'd see me plain, not as something to fix or show off. Just someone to walk beside." He nodded, quiet for a moment. "And now I think I was asking too little." A crack of thunder shook the window pane. Geneva didn't flinch. She crossed the room to the shelf and took down a tin box, then opened it and pulled out a folded paper. "I found this in the trunk before they broke it open," she said. "It's from my father. He wrote it when I was 14. I used to read it when things got hard." Fletcher stepped closer, glancing down at the paper. Do you want to read it to me? She hesitated, then handed it to him. You read it. He unfolded the letter and read aloud, voice low. My sweet girl, whatever the world tries to tell you, never forget the strength already planted in you. It is enough. It always will be. When he looked up, Geneva's eyes were wet but clear. He died that winter, she said. But that letter stayed with me. Fletcher folded it careful and handed it back. Your father was a wise man. I hope he'd be proud of me now. I think he would be. They stood there for a long moment, not touching, just breathing in the stormlight. By afternoon, the rain came in sheets. The roof held, but the wind pushed hard against the north wall, and Fletcher had to wedge another beam against the door. Geneva lit the oil lamp and brought it to the table, its glow warm against the gray outside. She set the pie down with a small nod. It was uneven at the edges, but golden and fragrant. Fletcher looked at it, then at her. You made this during a thunderstorm. I figured if the roof held, we'd deserve something sweet. He sat across from her as she sliced it. They ate in silence, the kind that didn't need to be filled. The pie was tart and warm, and Fletcher couldn't recall the last time anything had tasted like home. Afterward, Geneva stood, brushed crumbs from her skirt, and walked to the cabinet. She took down a folded piece of muslin and unwrapped a small pair of embroidery scissors and a half-finished sampler. I started this back in Illinois, she said. Never had reason to finish it. She held it up. The stitches were clean, the thread faded in places. It read, to build, not to flee. I think I'll finish it now, she said. Fletcher watched the light catch on her hair, the way she bent over the cloth with quiet focus. He reached for a book left on the shelf, one he hadn't opened in months, and settled near the fire. The storm wore itself out by midnight. The wind fell back to whispers and the rain softened to a hush on the roof. Geneva finished the last stitches just as the lamp began to sputter. She set the sampler on the mantel, then turned to him. Will you come to bed? He stood and crossed to her, brushing his hand along her cheek. Always. And when they lay down, the quiet stretched around them like a blanket, the kind woven from trust and the steady breath of two people who had chosen each other, not for escape but for the long road ahead. The last of the storm left behind a world rinsed clean, air sharp with wet pine and soil turned rich and dark beneath boot soles. Fletcher stepped out barefoot at dawn, pausing at the threshold as a squirrel darted along the fence rail, scattering droplets. Behind him, Geneva moved about the cabin with light footsteps, folding linens and refilling the water crock. By the time the sun broke through the thinning clouds, he was hitching the wagon. Geneva came out carrying a basket covered with a linen napkin. I packed bread and boiled eggs, she said. And 2 apples, the ones gone soft. He took it from her, setting it on the seat. We'll take the long road, check the fence along the creek bend. She shaded her eyes. You think it gave? Only one way to know. They rode out as the morning warmed. The trail sloped down through alder and aspen, the ground still spongy in places. Geneva rode beside him, upright and sure, her braid pulled tight beneath a wide-brimmed hat she'd found in a storage box and reshaped with steam. What was your mother like? She asked after a stretch of silence. Fletcher glanced sideways. Sharp-eyed. Kept bees and no one ever dared take honey without asking. She used to keep a notebook of words she liked the sound of. Said it helped her remember them when things got quiet. Geneva smiled faintly. Mine used to hum while she worked, even when she was tired. One day I asked her why she never sang the words. What did she say? She said words made things too real sometimes. They reached the bend by midday. The fence had held, but a pine had fallen across the far end, crushing 2 rails. Fletcher climbed down with a grunt and tested the line. Clean break, he said. I'll need to cut it free before it warps. Geneva set the basket on the grass and crouched beside the wagon wheel, watching as he worked the handsaw through the thick branch. He paused once to wipe his brow with his sleeve. You always work this way? She asked. Careful, but not slow? He nodded. Only way I know. I like it, she said. Feels steady. They ate lunch sitting on the edge of a flat rock, the river faint in the distance. Fletcher passed her the better of the 2 apples without a word. She took it, biting carefully near the stem. I've been thinking about the extra room, she said, brushing crumbs from her skirt. We could turn it into a sewing corner. Or grow herbs near the window. Fletcher took a sip from the tin cup. It's yours to shape. I'd like to learn how to keep chickens, she added. I read once they settle better if you talk to them while you feed 'em. He raised an eyebrow. You planning to charm the hens? I might, she said. Better than chasing them. They headed back late in the day, the wagon heavier with the pine he'd cut. Geneva held the reins for part of the way, and Fletcher leaned back, letting the rhythm of the trail carry them. The quiet between them had changed, not emptiness, but room. Room for all the things not yet said. That evening, Geneva sat cross-legged on the floor near the hearth, stitching a torn kerchief with tiny, careful movements. Fletcher polished the rifle he'd used on the ridge, the one that had brought her into his life. Have you thought about what you want for winter? She asked, not looking up. I'll need to buy salt blocks, maybe get another load of wood stacked. And patch the roof on the east side. I meant more than storing up, she said. What do you want it to feel like? He paused, cloth still in hand. Warm. Not just with fire. With something that lasts. She nodded, threading a new needle. Then we'll build it that way. Later, when the light had faded and the wind came through the trees like a quiet song, she rested her head against his chest where they lay together beneath the quilt. He ran a hand along her back, slow and steady. I used to think nothing could grow out here but scrub and hard ground, he said. But you've been planting things without even trying. Geneva's voice was soft. Maybe we both have. And in the hush that followed, with the crickets rising and the night folding close around them, neither needed to say more. The first frost came under a blue dawn, thin and glimmering across the ridge grass. Fletcher rose to find the water in the basin filmed with ice. He rubbed his arms and pulled his coat over his shoulders before stepping outside. The smoke from the chimney curled steady now, not rushed or uncertain. Inside, Geneva stirred oats on the stove, her hair pinned up in the way she did when she had a full morning planned. She didn't speak until he sat down and pulled his chair close to the fire. I was thinking, she said, we could build a root cellar before the ground sets hard. He looked up from lacing his boots. You have a spot in mind? The slope behind the goat shed holds shade all day. I tested it with a spade yesterday, earth's soft still. Fletcher nodded, already running measurements in his head. We'll need stone to brace the walls. I've got some stacked behind the barn. I'll haul what I can in the wheelbarrow once the sun's up. She set the bowls on the table and sat across from him. Her hands were rougher now, the lines of her palms darkened with work, and when she reached for the tin of salt, he caught her wrist gently. You don't have to do everything. I want to, she said. I never had a place where what I did mattered. He let her go. Here, it does. They spent the day hauling stone and clearing brush. Fletcher dug while Geneva sifted soil, separating out roots and old nails left from a long-gone lean-to. They worked without needing to say much, the rhythm of shared labor folding them closer. At midday, she paused beside the shed and pulled a folded paper from her apron. It came in yesterday's post. From the agency. He brushed the dirt from his knees and leaned back on his heels. They're asking if I'll send a testimonial for one of their pamphlets. About how the matching program led to marriage. He raised an eyebrow. I never wrote to the man they paired me with, she said. Only ever sent my name. I suppose they don't care much about the details. What will you write? She looked down at the folded paper, then tucked it back into her apron. Nothing. I think I've written enough strangers. They finished bracing the cellar walls by sundown. Geneva laid the last flat stone into place, then sat back on her heels and wiped her brow. That'll hold through winter. Fletcher nodded. You've a good eye for angles. She smiled, the kind that crept slow. My father taught me how to square a corner with string and a nail. Said it was a kind of honesty. They walked back to the cabin in long shadows. Fletcher lit the lantern while Geneva washed her hands. She pulled a jar of beans from the shelf and set them in the pot, then looked over her shoulder. Do you ever wonder what your brother would have thought of all this? Fletcher stirred the fire, slow and careful. I think he'd be glad I stopped running. Geneva didn't speak for a moment. Then she crossed to him and leaned her head against his shoulder. I never had a brother. Sometimes I wonder what it would have felt like to have someone speak for me. You've got someone now, he said. She looked up at him. I know. That night, the wind shifted. It came down from the north with a bite, and Fletcher added another log to the fire before they went to bed. Geneva curled close beneath the quilt, her feet tucked behind his knees. You ever think about what spring'll be like? She asked into the quiet. I do. What do you see? He ran his hand down her back, slow. Chickens in the yard. You planting herbs in the window box. Maybe a little one taking their first steps in the grass. She didn't answer right away, but when she did, her voice was steady. I'd like that. He kissed the top of her head. Me too. The months that followed passed in quiet, steady turns. Snow came heavy by December, blanketing the ridge in white so thick the fence posts disappeared for weeks. They split wood side by side, traded dried goods with neighbors who passed by with sleds, and kept a lantern burning in the window through each long night. When spring finally broke, it came all at once. The creek swelled, birds returned to the alder trees, and the sky turned soft with color. Geneva planted mint and chamomile in a bed along the cabin wall, her belly just beginning to round beneath her apron. Fletcher built a cradle from pine boards he sanded smooth by hand. He placed it near the hearth one morning while she was out tending the goats. When she returned and saw it, she didn't speak, just knelt beside it, ran her hand over the rail, and looked up at him with eyes full of knowing. Summer brought the baby a boy with Fletcher's brow and Geneva's mouth. They named him Elias after her grandfather and wrapped him in the quilt she'd stitched that winter. He was quiet, watchful, the kind of child who listened before he cried. They shared their days in rhythm feeding, mending, planting, and resting. Geneva taught Elias to hum before he could speak, and Fletcher carried him through the fields, pointing out the shape of clouds and the curve of the hills. Their home grew not with sighs, but with presence, with the echo of a child's laughter, the scent of bread rising in the oven, the softness of hands worn smooth by care. One evening, when the boy had fallen asleep and the wind was warm with the smell of sage, Geneva sat on the porch with her feet in Fletcher's lap. He traced the arch of her ankle with one finger, slow. I used to think I'd end up alone, she said. That I wasn't built for being chosen. You weren't, he said. You were built for choosing. And you chose us. She leaned forward and kissed him, long and sure, the kind of kiss that didn't ask for anything except the moment itself. They stayed like that until the stars blinked into place and the coyotes started up in the far hills. And when they finally went inside, they left the door open behind them, the night air spilling in soft, carrying the sound of crickets and the quiet promise of every morning still to come.